Listen closely. In the middle of the South Atlantic, surrounded by water so violent it looks like a living thing, there's a shard of volcanic rock called Bouvet Island. Officially, it's Norwegian, uninhabited, and protected. Unofficially, it is a rumor with coordinates. Sailors call it a ghost. Engineers call it a dead zone. And people like us, who have learned that almost every unreachable place hides a story, call it exactly what it is. A lock on a door someone never wanted opened. Here is what the postcards don't tell you. Bouvet is almost all ice and cliff, with no safe harbor and a shelf of black basalt that rises like a tooth from waters patrolled by orcas and cyclones. Nearly every expedition that tries to land is either beaten back by weather or chewed up by logistics. The island's surface is only the visible tip. Below it is a cone riddled with tubes, lava chambers, and cold brine pools, and below those are trenches tied to the South Atlantic Anomaly, Earth's natural weak spot for radiation, the place where satellites glitch, compasses wander, and instruments begin to lie. Across decades, very quiet people with very large budgets have tried to put ears and eyes there. Some went silent. Some came back afraid. Some did not come back at all. If you follow the strangest breadcrumbs, Cold War flashes captured by sleepy satellites, a lifeboat that appeared on shore with no ship to belong to, radio call signs that light up and vanish, a weather beacon that worked until the exact week a double flash lit the southern sky, you start to notice a pattern. Something that doesn't want company lives beneath Bouvet. Something that sends up lures. Something that wakes up when our species becomes too curious and sleeps when we go away. Tonight, for the record, I'm going to read you the timeline the maps forgot. Past, present, and the futures we are racing toward. Use your own judgment. But as you listen, remember this. Not every secret is buried to protect itself. Some secrets are buried to protect us from them. 12,500 BCE. A violent meltwater pulse tears through the southern oceans as ice sheets collapse. Oral histories from lost southern cultures, later folded into Polynesian and Patagonian myth, describe the hollow mountain that sings beneath the waves. Modern geologists would call it a vent field. Ancient navigators called it a warning. 9,800 BCE. A solar maximum coincides with volcanic unrest along a ring of submarine cones. One cone is the ancestor of Bouvet. Primitive skywatchers read auroras like scripture. They mark a star in the south that flickers when the sea breathes. Their carved spirals, later found thousands of miles away, echo the shape of an EM whirl that modern instruments register but cannot easily explain. 2100 BCE. A forgotten ship, cedar-planked and copper-nailed, limps far south of any sane route. Its captain records, "The sky breaks like a shell and the sea shows teeth of fire." He turns north and burns the log. Centuries later, fragments of that tale become part of a Phoenician sailor's cautionary chant. Beware the stone that floats the needle. 1739. The island is sighted by Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet de Lozier. He plots its position badly, leaving a confusion that lasts for decades. Conspiracy theorists will later point to this error as a deliberate smear of ink, a way to misplace the keyhole on any map. 1825. Captain George Norris of the British whaler sprightly names the new land in the region Liverpool and Thompson Islands and claims Bouvet for Britain. A fog erases his claim from memory. People argue for years about what he really saw. The argument itself is the point. When truth is noisy, secrets grow in its shadow. 1898. Norwegian whalers skirt the latitude and meet waters filled with shredded krill and the slick of oil. They blame storms. One mate whispers about boiling a whale alive without fire. That is a clue. Hydrothermal vents superheat water in narrow plumes. 1927 to 1928. Norway annexes Bouvet. On paper, it becomes a nature reserve too dangerous and too precious to touch. On paper, survey notes mention local magnetic inconsistencies and interference, which is a polite way of saying compasses stumbled and theodolites told jokes. Lines on charts tremble like hands. 1939 to 1945. During the Second World War, U-boats cruised the South Atlantic. Most records are mundane. A few mention a resupply rendezvous far south of any planned meeting point. After the war, a rumor spreads that a breakaway unit scouted subantarctic rocks for hideaways. New Schwabenland whispers smeared across the map like oil. Whether they touched Bouvet or not, something learned to listen for steel. 1946 to 1947. Operation High Jump sends an American task force to the Antarctic. Officially, it's training. Unofficially, it's a race to plant flags and study ice. A weather plane reports a line error event over the Southern Ocean. Modern code for a momentary compass flip and transient radiation spike. The pilot chalks it up to sunspots. Later, his son will spend a career tracing naval cables in the South Atlantic. 1955. A huge landslide on Bouvet creates the Nyroisa rock shelf, a rare landing spot. From above, the shelf looks like a small, deliberate dock. From below, divers will later find tubes where warm brines leach metals and life grows in threads. The island just put a new handle on the door. 1958. The first generation of deep ocean hydrophones starts listening. In the South Atlantic, the recorders pick up long, slow moans, a choir of geological sound. Mixed into that chorus, for seconds at a time, a tone repeats at precise intervals and then stops when a storm passes overhead. Natural vents don't care about the weather. Signals do. 1964. A South African expedition finds an unmarked lifeboat beached on Bouvet, with oars, a copper fuel drum, food, and no footprints leading away. There is no matching distress call, no missing ship, no human trail to explain why a boat came ashore without a story. The official report develops a polite amnesia. Unofficial whispers talk of a crew climbing toward the interior, the ice swallowing their traces, and something else. Glossy pebbles like frozen tar left in the scuppers. They harden into a conspiracy's favorite phrase. Black goo. 1969 to 1971. As the space age accelerates, ground stations in the southern hemisphere complain of multipath reflections from near the Bouvet longitude. A small automated weather station is assembled for Bouvet. It works flawlessly until it doesn't. Then comes the paperwork storm, and the word malfunction becomes a rug you can sweep anything beneath. September 22, 1979. A Vela satellite detects a distinctive double flash over the Southern Ocean, a pattern consistent with a nuclear test. Official voices argue about the source: Israel and South Africa, a meteor, a sensor glitch. Conspiracy voices point a finger at the triangle drawn by the Prince Edward Islands, the Southern Ocean gyres, and the dark rock called Bouvet. On amateur bands, brief bursts of encrypted numbers sound under the call sign of a ship no one can later place. The weather station near Bouvet, which had been reporting erratically, goes quiet for good. The blacked-out squares in declassified memos are the shape of a secret smile. 1982. The Falklands War roars to the west. Submarines chase each other through the Southern Ocean. Hydrophones listening for torpedoes record a non-biological, broadband cavitation event southeast of any declared patrol route. Something large moving faster than known submersibles, carving bubbles in the dark. Sonar men give it a name to make it less frightening. When you can name a thing, you can pretend you understand it. 1989 to 1991. The Cold War ends on paper. In reality, underwater arrays keep listening. Number stations migrate, shortwave ghosts walk to new homes, and somewhere on a sunless deck, a technician filters out a tone that keeps returning beneath the noise. A carrier with harmonics stacked like vertebrae. The station logs it as environmental. No one wants to call it a beacon. 1994. The South Atlantic Anomaly swells. Satellites glitch and reboot. Insurance companies rewrite policies. On a map that only a handful of engineers ever see, the center of this wandering radiation bruise drifts toward the longitude that makes radio amateurs grin and sailors swear. Private consortium tries to lay a cable. It detours. 1998. HARP becomes a household acronym, the new villain for old weather. While everyone argues about Alaskan arrays, a quieter network of southern receivers reports transequatorial ducting, Anomalies that don't behave like any textbook. One scientist writes in a private letter that it is as if the ocean itself is acting like a hostile ionospheric mirror. He is not invited back to present next year. 2001. A research trawler snags something metallic on the slope near Bouvet. The winch groans. The cable hums. The deck boss curses the weather and cuts the line rather than risk capsizing. In the bin, a handful of platelets that look like ordinary manganese nodules buzz the Geiger counter just a little too long. The cook tosses them as bad luck stones. That night, the galley radio picks up a number station in a language no one on board can identify. 2007 to 2008. A rare ham radio operation from the island blinks into life and then out again. The team reports brutal weather. Off the record, a member complains that headlamps kept dimming on the leeward side of a particular ice ridge, like batteries were bleeding into the rock. In the logs, he draws a spiral without realizing he copied a fisherman's warning from 12,500 years ago. 2011. Seafloor mapping around the island reveals a blind corridor, where multi-beam returns fuzz and sonar shadows thicken. The line is oriented like a runway cut into the continental slope. The last image on the last day shows a ripple. Sea above, sea below, a thin membrane of brighter pixels as if something colder moved through water slightly warmer than it should be. 2013 to 2016. Drones become cheap enough to lose. For independent teams attempt flights within Bouvet's weather window. Two never check in. One sends back a single frame that experts dismiss as lens flare. The last lands itself miles from its launch point, software overwritten with a familiar future-proof phrase. Unexpected environment. 2018. A large, heavily funded expedition turns back in bad seas within sight of the island. Their communications officer blames wind and ice. People who listen to tone, not words, hear embarrassment. The Southern Ocean is always dangerous. But this felt personal. 2020. A cube of water 300 meters on a side, southeast of the island, pulses in temperature over weeks. A researcher calls it a heartbeat and gets laughed at. Months later, the same cube pulses again, exactly to the hour despite different weather, different tides, different phases of the moon. The laughter stops, not because anyone believes her, but because no one wants to repeat the word heartbeat twice. 2022. A private satellite tries a high-inclination pass to collect thermal imagery during a calm break. The pass is clean. The imagery returns corrupted. Not blank, corrupted like someone whited out the pixels with living snow. The vendor issues a refund and a warning clause. Please avoid sensitive conservation zones. 2024. Fishing vessels report black snow on decks during rare lulls near the Bouvet latitude. The snow clings to rails and wiring, then melts into a smear that leaves a waxy shine. A handful of deckhands develop rash-like welts that fluoresce under UV for hours after exposure. Doctors blame contact dermatitis. A biologist swears she saw the smear move uphill. 2025. A fog bank west of Bouvet behaves like a wall. It rolls and stops on compass points. A patrol plane flying a standard pattern reports transient instrument resets inside the bank and, once outside of it, directly above a deep trench. The pilot, a veteran who has ridden every kind of turbulence, describes the feeling as being stretched. The word sticks. Back on land, a low-budget podcaster strings together the lifeboat, the Vela double flash, the black snow, and the heartbeat. He jokes that Bouvet is a seal jar. People laugh until they don't. 2026. A coalition of research agencies deploys a line of autonomous submersibles to map currents south of the island. 12 launch. 10 reports for 2 days. 8 reports for 2 weeks. Then, 3 begin transmitting clock drift. Atoms in their oscillators losing their place by millisecond steps that match the satellite heartbeat. 1 returns to the surface with its casing etched in patterns that look like coral skeletons, except there is no coral at that latitude and depth. The etch pits a line along a spiral. 2027. An undersea cable project tries again, farther west, claiming no interest in Bouvet at all. Their ships sail with the AIS transponders on and post selfies from the gym. The cable layer charts a smooth route. Midway through the job, all three vessels turn 90 degrees in a maneuver so precise it looks scripted and lay a gentle loop around a patch of sea. The final chart reads like a hug, as if they wrapped invisible glass with silk. When the press asks why, a company spokesperson says, "Seafloor integrity." The crew says nothing. The cook throws out more shiny stones. 2028. A polar orbiting satellite overflies the region during a geomagnetic storm and captures a brief, luminous column rising from the sea like a pale curtain. The image leaks. The official explanation calls it an auroral proton arc. Physicists groan. Wrong latitude, wrong signature. Amateur analysts overlay the column's footprint with the blind corridor on the 2011 map. The match is cruel. 2029. Solar maximum peaks. The South Atlantic Anomaly swells again. Satellites fail in clusters. A small nation's Earth observation bird dies right over the Bouvet line and transmits one last frame before it goes. A thermal smear shaped like a spiral trying to stand upright. The nation does not complain. The insurance company files an unusual claim and an NDA. 2030. A multinational task group, ostensibly protecting marine life, declares a temporary exclusion zone around Bouvet. Oceanographers cheer on principle. Fishermen swear on practice. In the first month of the zone, 2 uncrewed research sail drones vanish, and a third spends 47 hours circling a point before crawling home on half a battery, covered in a thin, iridescent film. In micrographs, the film looks like a lattice of carbon and metal that shouldn't self-assemble without a factory. The factory is the ocean. 2031. A long baseline acoustic experiment uses the Southern Ocean as a giant speaker to map temperature changes. The signals bounce and return like normal except when they thread the corridor. There, the sound arrives too soon, as if distance briefly shrank. Engineers blame currents. Mathematicians, being honest creatures, admit they do not have an equation for a sea that edits its own geometry. 2032. A private submersible with billionaire bravado attempts a deep dive in the region during a weather window. 3 hours into the dive, the topside tender hears a clear, human voice over the tethered line speaking a language the crew do not share. The pilot replies anyway, because we are a species that says hello into the dark. The sub ascends with a cracked viewport and a recording. Linguists cannot place the language. Phoneticians call it structured, vowel-rich, and annoyingly like us. The pilot leaves the sea and does not return. 2033. A bright, simple, awful idea takes hold inside a defense ministry. If the zone is ajar, shake it. A shaped explosive is lowered into deep water west of the island and detonated. Hydrophones 1,000 miles away record a chiming cascade that lasts for 17 minutes. During those 17 minutes, GPS time in the region drifts by a measurable fraction of a second. 10 satellites flag their clocks. In a nursing home in Montevideo, every analog watch stops and starts in sync. People who watched the ocean that day say the water looked taller. 2034. The black snow returns, falls for hours on the furthest edges of the exclusion zone, and this time it does not melt into tar. It flows into filaments, searches for cracks, and freezes in shining threads. The sailors who touch it wear gloves and keep them forever after, as if a lucky item could bribe fate. Under a microscope, the threads look like muscles made of wire. 2035. A technician in a southern ground station notices a meaningless blip in space telemetry repeating every 19 hours. He laughs, calls it a heartbeat, and posts a graph on a private forum. A hobbyist overlays the blip with recorded seismic tremors near Bouvet and finds a sync that feels more like a handshake. Someone else plays the blip as audio, slows it down, and hears a structure like a song. The thread goes quiet. The forum owner deletes his account. 2036. Light. For the first and only time anyone admits, a shaft of pale blue rises from the sea within the exclusion zone, climbs into low cloud, and winks out. The signature matches nothing. Not lightning, not plasma, not auroral curtains. Something filtered the ocean and returned photons stacked like a rope. 2037. The coalition quietly upgrades the temporary zone to a class sanctuary and deploys the thing no one talks about. A ring of moored devices whose purpose is to measure and to persuade. They hum at frequencies we cannot hear, and they blink with light we cannot see, and for a year the sea is merely a sea. Winds howl. Birds circle. The jar sleeps. 2038. A missing yacht appears on an automatic identification system ping, just once, near the corridor, then disappears again. The last known photo of the boat, years old, shows a spiral tattoo on the captain's hand. His daughter, now grown, says he was obsessed with a list of numbers that translated to dates and drift. When asked what drift meant, she says, "Time at sea that isn't in the log." 2039. The South Atlantic Anomaly dips. Satellites breathe easier. Insurance companies lower premiums. People relax. This is the trick of every long story. The lull before the page turns. 2040. A remotely operated vehicle, custom-built and prayer-proofed, noses the slope near Bouvet and finds a vent that isn't a vent. A geometry that looks like basalt until you look harder and see angles that nature rarely bothers with. The pilot threads fiber through a crack and touches something that rings through the cable like a struck bowl. For 3 seconds, every screen on the ship shows the same image. A spiral chalked on black glass, interrupted by a handprint that is not quite a hand and not quite a fin. The image does not record. The crew remember anyway. 2041. The heartbeat shifts. 19 hours becomes 21. The shift lines up with a deep, slow slip in the trench and a solar wind event with no apparent earthly effect. The sea glows faintly on a moonless night. Cameras see nothing. Everyone calls it bioluminescence because it is easier than calling it attention. 2042. A satellite tasked with mapping gravity anomalies returns a small, perfect circle of altered field strength where the corridor meets the shelf. Gravity is not supposed to have fingerprints. This one does. The circle's diameter matches the loop in the cable that hugged empty water 15 years earlier. The engineers who laid that loop retire early with full pensions and untroubled sleep. 2043. One of the sanctuary buoys stops humming. The sea around it turns the color of a healing bruise. A maintenance crew lifts the buoy and finds its underside scaffolded by the duple wire muscle threads that fell as black snow. The threads fall away when touched by sunlight. The crew make a joke about vampires. No one laughs. 2044. Something answers. Not in words.